crimes against humanity committed by the Third Reich were not only judged at the Nuremberg Trials but have also been partially addressed through culture. However, this is not the case for the atrocities committed by the army commanded by dictator Benito Mussolini, who was in power in Italy during World War II. Massacres were a key part of a war strategy that Il Duce adopted, starting from colonial conflicts in Africa and heavily employed in the countries occupied by the Axis powers. As a result of this strategy, thousands of civilians were tortured or killed by Mussolini's soldiers, but none of the more than 1,500 fascists reported to the UN International Commission were convicted. While Nazi war criminals faced a historic trial, most Italian crimes remained unpunished, as the United States and the United Kingdom shrouded Mussolini's cruel war in secrecy. In this video, we will narrate 3 of the most inhumane massacres carried out by the Italian army.
Che declinano, la vittoria è per noi, per I primi.
Dome Nikon Massacre. The Dome Nikon Massacre was a violent retaliation by the Italian army during the Axis occupation of Greek territory. Following the defeat in the Battle of Greece, a group of 72 guerrillas from the local People's Liberation Army established a base near the village of Oxia, near Dome Nikon, to support resistance actions. This group devised a trap to ambush an Italian column of 350 soldiers. In the early morning of February 16, 1943, the Greek rebels positioned themselves on a small hill 2 kilometers south of Dome Nikon. When they were about to carry out their plan, something went terribly wrong. The hill was unstable ground, an error the inexperienced guerrillas couldn't foresee. The terrain gave way due to erosion, and the men had to expose themselves. An Italian column consisting of 3 trucks and 3 motorcycles appeared on the road. The brave Greeks did not retreat and immediately opened fire on the Italian soldiers, before the entire convoy entered the battle zone and put them at a disadvantage. The battle was bloody, and the insurgents managed to kill 9 Italian soldiers and seriously wound a general. Considering the plan a success, the Greeks withdrew to a hideout in the mountains, unaware that one of the motorcyclists from the caravan had managed to escape. The soldiers safely reached a camp a few kilometers away, bringing news of the ambush. It was only a matter of time before the Italian revenge was set in motion. Once informed of the trap, the Italian military personnel began planning a punitive expedition. The civilians of Dome Nikon were ordered to stay inside their homes, and they obeyed, believing they would avoid punishment as they hadn't participated in the ambush. 40 vehicles loaded with enraged soldiers arrived in the village. With the help of the collaborating mayor, the Italian troops gathered the locals in the central square and, while arresting the suspects, set fire to the houses of the region's inhabitants. Women and small children were relocated to a neighboring village, while all males over 14 years old were sent to a concentration camp in Larissa. A column consisting of 138 prisoners and the accompanying soldiers embarked on a long march to the Axis camp. At around 10:30 p.m., a messenger sent by the wounded Italian general delivered a message that would be the death sentence for hundreds of people. The resentful and cruel officer ordered the immediate execution of the male population due to the demonstrated insurrection. Without hesitation, the soldiers followed the order, and the detainees were shot in groups of 7. Executions took place throughout the night and most of the following day due to the number of prisoners who were killed. When the massacre was over, the Italian military left with the family of the collaborating mayor. In total, the Italian army massacred 150 innocent peasants in the Greek village of Dome Nikon, near Mount Olympus. 60 years later, the massacre remains unpunished, although more disturbing information emerges every day. Currently, Stathis Somiatis, who lost his grandfather in that tragic event, is gathering evidence to seek justice. Meanwhile, in Rome, Lydia Santarelli, a history professor at the University of New York, is studying documents to reveal the war crimes committed by Italian soldiers during the occupation of Greece. Just as Stathis hears from witnesses and survivors, Professor Santarelli discovered that Dom Nikon was only the first of a terrible series of mass executions, in which thousands of civilians from more than 400 villages were massacred. Podhum Massacre. Here, on July 14, 1942, the fascist occupiers brutally shot 91 patriots, aged 16 to 60, from the village of Podhum and the legendary Grobnik fields. These shining graves will teach future generations about the immense sacrifices and heroic deeds of the sons and daughters of the Croatian coast of Istria and Gorski Kotar. The text we just heard corresponds to a commemorative marble plaque at the southern entrance of the large circular stone wall surrounding the sanctuary built in honor of the victims of the Podhum massacre. When the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and its peninsula were invaded by Axis forces in April 1941, the small village was besieged by the Italian militia. Within a few months of being occupied, local residents of Podhum and all of Istria began to defend themselves and formed organized resistance movements. The most prominent was the Partisans, the first armed unit of anti-fascist resistance, composed of a Yugoslav communist resistance movement. In early 1942, Italian control was threatened by these uprisings, so Prefect Temistokle Testa ordered harsh reprisals for those who refused to cooperate with Italian authorities. In one of the revolts, the partisans accidentally killed an Italian teacher and his wife. Knowing they had crossed a line, they had to flee the village. As a result, Testa ordered the murder of innocent civilians as retaliation for these Italian deaths, marking the beginning of horror. On the morning of July 12, 1942, 250 Italian soldiers, under the command of Major Armando Giorlio of the Waffen-SS, entered the town of Podhum. The first thing they did was corral all males aged 16 to 64, totaling an estimated 100 prisoners, 14 of whom resisted and were executed on the spot. These captives were taken to an open field south of the village, on the edge of a small earthen pit. They were grouped in successive batches of 5 detainees, and, coldly and mercilessly, they were shot in the head with rifles. Lifeless bodies fell into the pits until all prisoners were eliminated. The exact number is unknown, but it is estimated that around 130 souls were inhumanely killed in this procedure. After the massacre, Italian forces set fire to the village of Podhum and deported the remaining inhabitants, mainly elderly people, women, and children, totaling nearly 900 civilians. All were destined for forced labor camps in Frosinone, Italy, where most were detained until late 1943. Of those deported to Italian camps, 49 people, including 12 children, did not survive. Primas Massacre. The Primas Massacre was the mass murder of Croatian civilians by Italian occupation forces on November 16, 1942, in retaliation for a prior partisan attack. Much like what happened in Dom Nikon on November 13, 1942, partisans ambushed an Italian truck convoy near Primasen. 14 soldiers were brutally killed, 7 were injured, and 6 were taken prisoner. On November 16, 1942, 3 days later, Italian forces surrounded Primasen and began firing indiscriminately bombarding the village with ground artillery and 3 planes. The siege lasted about 4 hours, causing a large number of civilian casualties and injuries, as well as virtually destroying the village. After the attack, Italian infantry entered the village, shooting and bayoneting surviving male civilians. These men were separated from women and children, who were taken prisoner. The houses that were still standing were set on fire and looted, while others were assaulted with grenades for prevention, killing several civilians without mercy, including children. Around 300 homes were destroyed during the brutal day. More than 200 civilians, mostly women and children, were arrested and deported to the Vadis concentration camp. The exact number of fatalities is unknown to this day, as many bodies were incinerated, but it is estimated that casualties were between 80 and 150 civilians. We are now nearing the end of the video, but before we say goodbye, we want to ask you, do you think Mussolini's crimes should have been judged in the same way as those of the Nazis? Leave your opinions in the comments below. That concludes today's video. We thank you for staying until the end and look forward to seeing you in the upcoming installments of military history.